So,
Yep.
Mr. Harrigan, we are ready to go.
Recording has begun.
Okay, thanks. I will call the meeting to order. This is, now I have to get the agenda. This is the special meeting of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission of the Town of Fairfield, January 27, 2021. The first item on our agenda, well, given the folks who are going to be, we're going to shuffle things around a little bit until we do. Commissioner Gordon sitting in for Commissioner Noonan, and Commissioner Elliott is sitting in for Commissioner Corcoran. Commissioner Braun is going to be late, but we're not quite sure how late. And Commissioner DiGiacomo is in absentia, so we don't have someone to sit in for Commissioner Braun at the moment. So we have, with those alternates sitting for regular commissioners, we have 6 in attendance. To give Commissioner Braun an opportunity to get here, we're going to move things around a little bit.
Yep. I see her appearing on the screen.
Oh, good. We have Commissioner Braun. Excellent. So now we have a full slate of 7 commissioners sitting, which is great. So why don't we take things backwards? We'll do item number 3, discussion of pre-application review. Item 2, PLC next steps, and then our discussion on the accessory apartment, and depending on how far we get, we want to move that to a vote. Okay?
Okay.
With that, Mr. Went, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 3, and I will note that thank Mr. Barnhart for joining us this evening, primarily for items 1 and 2. So bear with us, Mark. We'll get to those hopefully in not too long. So item 3, pre-application review. I forwarded to you a copy of Connecticut General Statute Section 7-159B and an outline, which basically is a statute that gives the commission the authority to have a non-binding pre-application discussion with an applicant to kind of do a gut check feedback session before an applicant might make a more significant investment in further engineering and design plans, particularly if there's an item, you know, kind of a concept they might be floating out, or a regulation amendment, or a toe in the water on a new concept that it might benefit both the commission and the applicant to have a non-binding kind of discussion, kind of a gut check, if you will, for some feedback before an applicant goes to full design. Westport and other communities have been doing this for several years. I did provide to you the kind of the pre-application review procedure that Westport utilizes, and I have spoken with some practitioners that have availed themselves of this opportunity. At least at the Westport model, they limit it to a 20-minute session, so it's not a prolonged discussion. It's not a public hearing. It is a public process, so clearly, like tonight's meeting, the public can view and listen to what's presented and said, but they do not have the opportunity to be heard. In whatever feedback is presented to the applicant through the commission is non-binding, but pursuant to the statute. But the idea is, if they're going to have a large project that's going to be the subject of a future hearing, there may be occasions where, and I can think of a handful of projects that might be coming up, or just looking backwards. So, for example, the Metro Center project, where there was a lot of discussion, it may have been beneficial to have a pre-application meeting where the applicant does a 10-minute quick overview of what they're considering, and then the commission would have 10 or 15 minutes to kind of give quick feedback as to what the kind of off the cuff, or kind of a gut check as to whether the proposal might be in the ballpark, or whether there are elements of that application that might be reworked, and just to have an informal discussion to help guide an applicant, give an applicant a little bit more guidance before they make a more significant investment design plan. So then when the time comes where they make a formal application, you would have seen the application or the proposal a little bit, and then hopefully the applicant will have taken into consideration some of the feedback that the commission has provided. So that's really the opportunity that we have for your consideration as to whether you would welcome such a procedure. So firstly, I think we need to, have a quick discussion on whether you think the idea has merit, and then beyond that, we can talk about how we might do it procedurally or roll it out as to whether or not it would be a regular agenda item, whether it would be before regular business. And I think it's important to keep a time limit to this. Westport and other towns keep it constrained, so it just doesn't become an unconstrained discussion. The idea is that there's a specific concept that an applicant might want to pitch, and the commission would have a specific time frame to provide some initial feedback, and then beyond that, the applicant would decide how to proceed thereafter. So that's all I have at this point. And if we could talk, if you think it's a good idea, we can talk about how might procedurally to implement that. But that's all I have to say at this point.
I appreciate that. Thanks. So, this would be a circumstance where we would get some materials in our packet that would give us a brief overview of the concept or the general understanding of what the application or the proposal is. Now, I see that in the statute, the pre-application review is sort of discretionary. It's up to the applicant, where the applicant has to ask for that, or can we ask the applicant to do that? If can we require it?
That's it. Well, let me take a look at this real quick.
Jim, if I could just add, as I understand it, usually this even occurs before an item is recommended for public hearing. So it's even before that process. So
Right.
It may not be on the board's radar to know to request that kind of meeting. It would really, because their engagement is with Jim at that point. And so I don't even know whether you would hear it through the grapevine in the community for some of these projects that are really kind of confidential until they're not.
Right. And I wouldn't want our request for a public agenda item if it was only based on what we're hearing in the community kind of thing anyway, right? I mean, I think it would be when it gets to the point where the applicant is seeking the office staff assistance in, vetting of projects, that we would then counsel the applicant to request a pre-application review with the commission to get feedback.
Yeah, and in reading this again, I do see it says at the applicant's request. That said, I mean, there's always an opportunity for us through the commission to the applicant requested. I think a strict reading of the statute would say I don't think we can require an applicant to avail themselves of this process. But if there's an opportunity where the commission might think it's beneficial and the applicant hasn't requested it, we can certainly communicate that to the applicant. So.
We could also structure some very simple regulations that would require certain types of projects to come before the commission with a pre-application review. Have that be some component of that. But
yeah, I don't know that you'd want to do it in every case, but I can see that there would be advantages in some cases.
Yeah. So members of the commission, anybody? Sure, Commissioner Brayman.
Thank you. So I presented at pre-application reviews in Westport, and I think it's a very good process. I think that it might serve us well to experiment with that here in Fairfield. And I think there's certainly applications where it could benefit both the applicant and the commission to have the chance for that preliminary feedback without the need for a full-blown application. And depending on what the feedback is, the application very well may change before it comes to back to the commission. I think that it's worth discussing whether to have certain types of applications be sort of automatically or presumptively subject to a pre-application review. And I certainly think it's a great idea for staff to communicate to applicants who are consulting with staff that maybe a pre-application review or maybe a particular project is ripe for a pre-application review before they go to a full application.
We can't hear you, Matt.
Sorry, I said excellent comments. Thanks, Commissioner Braun.
Yeah, I totally agree with Attorney Brayman's comments. I just wanted to add, would this be in addition to and maybe a little different than what they call code review, which is also a non-mandatory, non-binding, non-appealable review by most of the town departments? Would it come before or after that, or is it related to that in any way? Or this would be more the commission and code review is more the director? How does that work in relation to the code review that they do?
Sure. They would be completely independent of each other.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that in most cases, when a code review, for the benefit of everybody, is a preliminary meeting before formal application is made. You've all seen the minutes of these meetings. It's really an internal staff meeting amongst all of the regulatory agencies within the town that have a first pass at plans before they get on a commission agenda as a formal application to work out any code issues. So we're not wasting the commission's time, the public's time, and the applicant's time for an application to be submitted that doesn't have any chance for success because it falls short of certain basic regulatory requirements. So that is a completely separate process than this. I would envision that this type of pre-application would likely precede an internal code meeting, because normally for a code meeting to be scheduled, we have a fully engineered site plan by then. So if we're going to go down this road and it's a preliminary kind of testing concepts type of discussion, we may not have we have a conceptual site plan, but maybe not a fully engineered site plan. So, I would guess that in most cases, this would precede a code meeting, but it wouldn't necessarily have to do so. But in either case, they'd be completely separate reviews.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Commissioner Francis?
I agree. This sounds like a very worthwhile idea. And I'm glad to hear Commissioner Brayman has done this several times. Probably others of you attorneys have too. And it's good because people hear things and they ask us, and we know no more than they do. So at least it would give us a little idea to say, well, it's so big because it's unaffordable housing or whatever, So we'd have a little background knowledge. So I think it's a very positive idea.
I agree. Other comments? Commissioner Levy?
Yeah, I think it would be very helpful in terms of having an open dialogue before we get to the formal presentations. I can think particularly in connection with 830G applications that, having that open dialogue would be very helpful, both for the developer and for us. So I think it was something we should explore.
Sounds good. Yeah, Commissioner Elliott.
So my only question is, Jim, to staff is, can they, is there a way to vet out, would you kind of be the gatekeeper as far as who comes in front of us? Because so that it's just not, a random, question, because it could be, if it's just kind of open, discussions, anyone can bring anything to us, and that might be, kind of time consuming.
No, that's an excellent question, Peter. And we basically act in that capacity presently. Long before we see a formal application reach an agenda and a public hearing, there's usually quite a bit of dialogue that goes on between staff and a prospective applicant and other agencies in the town. So we would absolutely be a gatekeeper with respect to, it's not going to be a come one, come all, let's throw mud on the wall and see what sticks kind of process. And I wouldn't anticipate that it's going to be every application that would be the subject of a public hearing would be ripe for such a discussion. But there are certain applications, if it's particularly something that might be a regulation amendment or a zone change or some other type of application where some quick feedback might be beneficial rather than a straightforward application. So the short answer to your question, I think, is yes, we would absolutely continue to act as the gatekeeper. So we're not, I don't expect that this is going to create a large number of reviews. It's just a certain subset of applications I think would be particularly beneficial. And we'll get a better sense for how that rolls out as we go. But we just wanted, and I've had some preliminary conversations with the chairman, and we wanted to share this more broadly just to see if the commission would be open to this type of thing. We have talked about this in years past. There was some, with previous makeup of the commission, there was some concern about potential predisposition, but the statute's pretty clear on what it allows you to do. And I think we're well positioned to have an open and constructive dialogue, a two-way dialogue with an applicant and the commission. And I think it would benefit all parties.
Without a doubt. All right. So what do we do to move this forward then next?
Well, I don't really have to do anything formal other than if you think it's something that you want to implement, the question then becomes, what structure do you want to do this? I know, would we put this, if we were to have such a presentation, would you want it at the beginning of a meeting before all the other business, on a separate, perhaps, maybe we have an off night session where we do this so we're not backing up an agenda, or we expand the scope of, an agenda to consider this. I mean, any of those possibilities exist. And we can structure it so we would not have a presentation on a night where we expect to have a very lengthy public hearing. If there's a night, I know that's hard to imagine lately because we've been had an influx of applications that seem to have either taken multiple nights or the majority of an evening, but that's not always going to be the case. There will be meetings where we can structure an agenda where the public hearing may not be as a heavy lift as others, so we can kind of slot that in. So, if we're talking about a 20 to 30 minute time block and limiting it to that, and I think it is important to be time constrained to foster, feedback and discussion, that we'd be in a position to schedule that depending on, what we've got in the hopper to deal with. And if there's an opportunity like tonight, where occasionally we might add a meeting to the agenda, we can kind of, play that as we go.
Yeah. I think in the ordinary course, and I'd like to get everybody's feedback on this, the ordinary course, it would seem to make sense to put that just before the public hearing. We'd go through our executive session and so on, and then we could have the short presentation, pre-application review, and then when that was finished, we'd move on to the public hearing.
Yeah, I think that we could do that, and we would just have to be mindful of what we're scheduling on any particular evening to make sure that works. And what we can do is, not to reinvent the wheel, but we can kind of customize or plagiarize or borrow, or however you want to phrase it, from the Westport procedure, or maybe some other towns, and develop, and we can take a pass at that and get it out to you, which is, hey, here's a guideline of what we're going to give to the applicants, just to make sure you're all in agreement on what the ground rules are. But I would probably structured very similar to what we've already submitted to you.
Yeah, you know, that now that you mentioned it, you say it like that, I think that's important. There should be like a frequently asked questions or a little policy document, because we should be treating, you know, all of those in the same manner, right? And there should be some communication that sort of documents what we're telling them, and so maybe that's the next step.
Yeah, we can develop a standard procedure document that's, you know, customize it for us, very similar to what the Westport model might be, and get that to you. And I would think that, you know, we've got a couple interested applicants that, you know, I've put off this discussion because, you know, this commission has been very busy with some very you know, weighty applications that have taken a great deal of our time, and I'm hoping that there, you know, as we move forward, there'll be windows of opportunity to slot these things in where we're not backing up applications, and we can make it a constructive process.
Yeah. Okay. Other comments, Commissioner Braman?
Yeah, Westport, I think I saw the applicants sign something or has their representative sign a form that just confirms proceeding is going to be subject to the statute, and that protects the commission from having anything that commission members say be, you know, considered binding.
Good.
Yeah, we're happy to follow up in short order with kind of a procedural document for your blessing. But I just wanted to, you know, we just wanted to have the dialogue to see, to make sure the commission was comfortable to proceed, and I appreciate the fact that you folks agree this might be beneficial to all parties.
Good. Any other last minute comments? I think we're done. Commissioner Levy?
Just real quick, part of the gatekeeper, perhaps since the statute says may, would it be either the chairman or our director would be the one to determine whether or not we want to engage in the review on a preliminary basis? Something to consider.
Yeah, I think the way we would likely structure that, Steve, would be that since the statute says the applicant, that the applicant would make the request. And if there's, you know, like any other procedural issue before the board, if there's question in my mind or staff's mind as going forward, we would certainly consult with at least initially with the chair to see if that needed broader discussion before moving forward.
Right. And then one other point in terms of Freedom of Information Act, I assume this would have to be part of a noticed meeting, and would be something we would not discuss in groups outside of the meeting. Maybe that should be contained there in it.
Yeah, I think we treat it like any other agenda item, and like it is a public process, so we can't exclude anybody, nor would we want to. So I think, yeah, I think that would. We would treat it just like it's an application, if you will, but your feedback at that meeting is you know, specifically non-binding pursuant to the statute.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we'll look forward to hearing more from you on this in due course. So the next item on our agenda is the POCD next steps and the affordable housing plan.
Okay. You may recall that we had I believe it could very well be our last formal planning meeting in which we presented to you, and by we I mean Emmeline, presented to you a detailed outline of the findings of our winter POCD workshops. And we had a discussion about that and some next steps. Where we are now is, you may recall there were a couple of issues that through voting, the participants at the workshops voted on items that they thought might warrant further discussion. And the topic of housing was one issue that we thought we needed to do some additional targeted outreach. We have an opportunity. Mark Barnhart, through the Affordable Housing Committee, has secured some funding to update the town's affordable housing plan. And it's our intention, in speaking with Mark, that we would leverage that opportunity to have a little bit broader discussion on housing in general and make that part of our next public outreach efforts. So Mark is kind enough to join us and can outline for you the breakdown of what the Affordable Housing Commission envisions for that plan, and then we can discuss that.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, members of the commission. Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the town, working through its Affordable Housing Committee, last updated the town's Affordable Housing Plan in 2014. And this body was very instrumental in that effort. There was a series of 11 action steps that were identified, or recommendations that were identified in that plan. And I'm happy to report again, with the active support and participation of this group, this commission, we've implemented a large number of those and made progress on the others. Many of you also know that, are intimately familiar with Section 8-30G of the Connecticut General Statutes. And there was an amendment back in 2017 that passed on the General Assembly and was vetoed by the governor, but there was an effort to override the governor's veto and enacted into law, which provided very modest changes to the statute. Some very minor relief to communities like Fairfield, particularly as it relates to lowering the threshold for subsequent moratorium and providing for a 5-year term for that subsequent moratorium. But also buried in that law, that change, was a requirement that communities update or create an affordable housing plan every 5 years. So we're certainly mindful of that. And as one of the communities that would potentially benefit from, if we eventually get to the first moratorium and in due course proceed with the second moratorium, we would benefit from having an updated affordable housing plan. So mindful of that, the Board of Selectmen recently tasked the Affordable Housing Committee with updating the town's affordable housing plan and allocated funds for that purpose. And we're and obviously aware of your efforts to update the town's plan of conservation development, and housing is always a major discussion point in those plans. And that was one that Jim had indicated, through the workshops, was identified as an area that the public also wanted to have further discussion around. So I think there's an opportunity here, and I know Chairman Steve Grathwell from the Affordable Housing Committee is on this call, and several other members are as well. But I know the Affordable Housing Committee would look forward to, again, having the Planning and Zoning Commission play an active role in that plan update. And I think, again, there's an opportunity for us to do that in a way to leverage resources that we have to help fulfill your goals to update the town's master plan. And so we're in the process now of soliciting qualification statements and proposals from planning consultants. And, part of that scope of work we've reviewed with your staff with the intent of, again, working together on this initiative. So that's the overall game plan.
That sounds great. And, we really appreciate the opportunity to, get involved and really piggyback on the effort to leverage the study and the work product to influence the update to the POCD. Right, it's a huge opportunity, and we thank you for it. Do others have any questions or comments for Mr. Barnhart? Yeah, Commissioner Braun.
How much of what we're doing will be impacted by the pending legislation in Hartford I just today got wind of two new pieces of legislation that are being proposed. One is to preserve the zoning commissioners' rights to manage town within their boundaries, and the other is the opposite, to completely revamp the entire enabling statute. I don't see the text of them. I don't know how to, I'm having trouble navigating, honestly, the site, but how much of that gets factored into our planning long term? And is there a way that we can weigh in as a commission, or can we have our director weigh in Hartford when public hearings come up on this? Is there an organization we should belong to? How can we be heard on this before anything gets passed that could affect what we do?
Jim, you want to start?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot going on. This is going to be a fairly short session. It's an online virtual session of the legislature this year, so hard to tell yet how much of what's being thrown up on the wall at the moment might actually proceed to actual bills. Having said all that, there's been for the last couple of years an attempt, largely through the land use section of the Connecticut Bar Association, to try to do a little cleanup in quotes words work on the enabling statute that, in my opinion, is not very tremendously impactful. There was a lot of attention when the group known as Desegregate Connecticut was formed, and we've forwarded some emails about some of their activities and some of their agenda items for the commission to review and be aware of. Some of their initial some of the attention that they brought to bear, there was pushback from towns that it's the state trying to tell local communities what to do. Their message has, I think, in my view, been tempered a bit, and they've in their package of potential goals has been kind of not reduced, but distilled down to some initial steps. There's been a lot of rhetoric in terms of whether the statutory proposal to remove community character, if you will, from as a decision basis in the statute was kind of a touch point issue where some interpreted that to mean we're taking away local control. And that's a debatable issue, but the bottom line is we can certainly, the group is very active. There's a Desegregate Connecticut group that has a very active website, and we forwarded you a couple things. They do periodic meetings to talk about what their agenda is all about. There's other groups that are kind of coalescing to push back against those types of proposals. So the bottom line is, yeah, we can try to be appraised of what is pending before the legislature, and obviously you all, as in your individual capacities, have the ability to reach out to our local legislative groups, or if you as a commission want to take a position on any particular thing, that's always a possibility. So I don't know if that's a direct answer to your question, but there's a lot going on around the idea that the state should have a more broader, and I will say of the main, if you haven't viewed the 4 or 5 points platform of Desegregate Connecticut, I will say that we are Fairfield, I think in large measure already has done and continues to do, and will many of the things that they are suggesting. We already have a transit-oriented a TOD plan and regulations that emphasize density around transit. We're discussing later today an accessory apartment regulation that may increase opportunity for accessory apartments. We already have a fairly broad opportunity for multifamily housing within the town. So we already embody many of the objectives that folks are trying to do. There are communities within the state that don't permit any of those things that I think that are more the target of some of these types of proposals. That some would argue that towns that don't have any opportunity for multifamily housing ought to consider that. Again, I think that from what this town has achieved over its long history and with this commission in particular, more recently in its TOD planning, I think measure up to many of the standards that are being discussed. So, but again, opinions can certainly vary on what the impact of any of these proposals might be locally. That's, wow, probably went a little more than I needed to go. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in on that, or if Emmeline wants to jump in.
I'll just mention that we are obviously monitoring legislative actions or proposals up in Hartford, just like you all are. And I've had conversations with some members of our delegation already. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the Affordable Housing Committee has also extended an invitation for our entire delegation to join members of the Affordable Housing Committee at our upcoming meeting on the 10th of February. And you're more than welcome to join in on that conversation. So the idea was to make sure that they're cognizant of what we're trying to do in terms of updating our affordable housing plan, but we also want to keep tabs on what's happening up in Hartford, and we'll of course keep you abreast through your staff of those discussions.
Yeah, and it's really important to keep those elected representatives informed about everything that we have done and are doing. You know, one of the things that we didn't mention, not for lack of forgetting, but is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that we created, and that we're now actually proactively acquiring land to develop for that specific purpose and so forth. But Commissioner Braun, you raise a good question about whether we as a community, whether it's through our first select woman or through the office of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission, or the commission itself, should be sort of advocating or the like. And I haven't seen that. I have seen various planning directors that have shared information and chairs of commissions that, and I'm loosely involved in one of those groups, just getting information, trying to stay on top of what's happening. But there are some organizations, the planning associations, that are monitoring the legislation and developing positions for advocacy. And so, each member of this commission could join and participate in one of those organizations and get involved in it, in that way as well. But I don't know if any of you, Emmeline or Jim or Mark, have more information about what the planning groups are doing in that front.
Well, I just want to add too that keep in mind that Kristen McCarthy-Vahey is the chair of the Planning and Development Committee at the House. So by all means, she is your local representative and resource, and she's at the heart of those bills that are related specifically to that. Keep in mind that there is a separate housing committee as part of the state legislature. So bills that are directly targeted towards housing don't go in front of planning and development. So but Kristen is very she's very accessible. So I would say you can certainly also reach out to her in terms of your questions and your concerns. I think that right now, while we're in the spaghetti phase of legislature being proposed, there's a lot out there in terms of rumors and what might actually be fact in terms of what's in the language. So again, Kristen and some of the other representatives are a good resource for that, just to find out what the actual language says and how it has impact. There are, what I would say is that there are certainly things that are specifically within state control, like, for us here in plan and zoning, we don't control alcohol beverage control, licensing, regulation in that regard. So there are certainly things that the state takes on because we are a small state, and it doesn't make sense for us to have local control in those avenues, but it certainly doesn't seem like the overriding message is that local municipalities should lose a majority of what it is that they presently regulate in terms of plan and zoning. 830G, what I will say is, when 830G was adopted 30 years ago, it was born out of the necessity of understanding that the state of Connecticut was going to have deep economic issues if we didn't have more affordable housing available for workforce populations. So, it's a very unique circumstance where the state decides to override what traditionally has been appropriately understood as local control. So that's just my 2 cents.
I would also add that our other elected representatives are also active in the issues, and Senator Tony Hwang has been in the past on the Housing Committee, and he is presently the ranking member on Housing, Higher Education, and Public Safety and Security Committees. So you might get a different perspective on the issues when you talk to Kristen McCarthy-Vahey as opposed to talking to Senator Hwang. And I would encourage folks to get a broad perspective on the issues and not cabined into one camp or the other. Commissioner Braun?
Sort of a detail that I forgot to bring up before, any of the laws that are being considered, at least the version that I saw that was proposed in 2020, which I understand because the session ended without it being brought to the General Assembly, it's all starting over again now, so at the committee level, but I think they're similar. I don't think I saw anywhere in there, I saw a lot of emphasis on increasing multifamily housing and increasing quantity of housing in every town with less ability to sort of control it or anything. But I didn't see anything that would say what happens to 8-30G, because anytime you're increasing the quantity of housing, you're increasing the denominator of the ratio. And I was wondering if Mark could address that. If you're sort of asking towns or incentivizing them or preventing them from managing it to increase the total number of housing, is then 8-30G going to be ended? Because you're never going to reach any of those goals if you keep adding to the denominator of the 10% ratio. And also, it's a little different when you consider the moratorium. Is that whole thing going to disappear if they change the whole enabling statute? Should it disappear?
I haven't seen, any specific legislation tinkering with the formulas under 830G. We've made several attempts at that. In fact, to your point earlier, I know in 2017, the Affordable Housing Committee and myself, and I think the first selectman at the time, all submitted testimony advocating for even more broader relief under the statute. And I know our delegation worked tirelessly to make the changes that did happen, but they were fairly modest. And that's just the way it is up there in terms of counting the votes. So I haven't seen anything changing as it relates to 830G. I think we'll get into this broader conversation about how you count affordable housing units, perhaps with regard to the first agenda item. But that's probably the number that's most important to us is the moratorium, getting sufficient housing unit equivalency points. And I understand it just provides temporary relief under the statutes, a 4-year or 5-year moratorium, which doesn't cover every type of affordable housing application either. There's some that are exempt from moratorium provisions, so we need to bear that in mind as well. But in that regard, the denominator that you're talking about is set by the decennial census. So every 10 years, it's reset. So, granted, as you create more housing units in town, obviously the total number of dwelling units in town will increase, and therefore it could have an impact in terms of the overall percentage. But from the standpoint of just looking at the broader inventory and how we relate to the 10% threshold, we're at 2.5%. And, despite all of our best efforts, it will be difficult. I don't foresee that in any of our lifetimes we'll ever get close to the 10% threshold, which was part of my argument to the General Assembly in 2017. It's when you create a goal, the goal has to be measurable and it has to be attainable. And for many communities, as evidenced by the fact that since the statute came into effect in 1990, there were 31 communities that were exempt at that time, and today there are 31 communities that are exempt under the statute. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there is no graduation to the next level. You never pass the milestone that's set. So it's not, in my view, it has its benefits. Clearly, we've made some progress as a state in terms of creating affordable units, but there are other ways to do that too. So I don't think we're going to change that. I don't see any appetite to address it right now up there. But boy, I would like, if there is some legislative proposals pending before the General Assembly as it relates to accessory dwelling units or anything along those lines that may not particularly relate to what we're doing here, because we've already kind of set the bar higher than some other communities. Perhaps there's a way to, again, take a look at some of the vague ambiguities in the existing language and tighten them up. That would be of benefit to a community like Fairfield. So there is an opportunity through that process, through that sausage making process, perhaps to get some relief in other areas in very minor ways that would help make our collective lives a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, that's excellent points, all really well taken. I think the net of the moratorium is that it then gives the town the opportunity to further develop and implement its plans, its affordable housing initiatives, its own things to promote and stimulate affordable housing in a manner that is more controlled by, the local population, the citizens, the municipal local government, the town plan and zoning commission, and so forth, and the Affordable Housing Committee. Which I said I always viewed that as the incentive, which hopefully had an achievable, continued moratorium, which is what you were articulating before, right? So the carrot is really the incentive for the town to continue on its mission, so that it just keep getting better, right? You're never going to get there, right? But at least you can keep moving the ball forward. So, all right. Well, this has been a good conversation. I'm sure that, most of us could sit here and talk about this all night. Well,
more to be discussed as we roll out the planning process. But I just wanted to say that as you probably know, Mark works in very close collaboration with our office across all topics. But I view this opportunity similar to the opportunity that was created with working in conjunction with the Economic Development Commission in our transit-oriented development effort. And we're very grateful for his effort to secure the funding in the willingness of the Affordable Housing Committee to share their resources with us in a joint planning effort. And I think the mutual collaboration will benefit us both and we look forward to, once we have the consultant on board rolling out a schedule for how we might proceed. So obviously more to come, but we just wanted to give you a heads up as to what our next steps will be, and we look forward to rolling this out come sometime this spring.
Yeah. All right, very good. We all ready to move on? Okay. So next item on our agenda, and the last one, is a discussion of the accessory apartment proposal, the revised draft, which you should all have in the email from Mr. Wendt. The latest version he circulated with the staff comments with our packet was, I think it was a red line, but then a couple of days ago or a week ago, you circulated one with red and green and
oh, it's got all kinds of colors on it. So perhaps, hopefully not confusing, but certainly on the January 12th meeting of the commission, we had a rather detailed and good dialogue in terms of where individual commissioners fell on certain aspects of this proposal. There was consensus on some, not on others. So what I attempted to do in this draft is in the red, if you've got it before you, hopefully, or on your screens, the red colors were, in my view, where I heard there was agreement or consensus, where there were suggested changes that were proposed, and in the red text, that's not highlighted was language that we have inserted since the original draft that from our last discussion.
You want to put that one up on the screen, Emeline? Thanks. Keep going.
So the plain red text is where my interpretation of where I thought I heard consensus amongst the commission at the last discussion. There are some red highlighted, the highlighted text that's highlighted in red are areas where I thought there was consensus on eliminating some of the language that was proposed. And then in green, I have highlighted areas where there wasn't necessarily agreement, but where some, for example, and it might benefit us once we have the document up on the screen to walk through it section by section. It might make more sense, but.
And since this is a planning meeting, we're not in executive session. That means that we can ask for input and have some dialogue with those folks that are invitees, like Mr. Barnhart and.
Yeah, we last time, we got into a fairly lengthy discussion, particularly on the issue of affordability, where I thought Mark's participation might be beneficial. But what we can do is kind of quickly walk through this. And I think if we start the first, at the bottom, there's section 6.3.2. There was some discussion, like, for example, in red, the original proposal was to keep the 40% of the have a maximum apartment size of 40% of the area dwelling, or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less, is what the original draft had proposed. With feedback from the hearing, there seemed to be consensus amongst the commission to potentially increase that 1,000 square feet to 1,500 feet. But there wasn't unanimity of opinion on whether or not we should keep the minimum 450 square foot size. So that would be the, again, where we need to perhaps have a little bit more further dialogue as to whether or not there's consensus. There were a number of you that thought that it was okay to eliminate that 450, and some of you thought it should stay. So that's why that's in green as an area that needed some further discussion. But from my interpretation of the last discussion, there seemed to be consensus that there was agreement to up the, keep the 40%, but no greater than 1,500 feet. So I'll leave it at that if you want to discuss these section by section, Mr. Chairman.
Well, so it's by show of, well, I guess not hands. Do we want to speak each one of these separately, or just have a little review first and then go back to the beginning?
I can walk through the entirety of the document if you'd rather, and then we can go back. It's up to
Yeah,
you.
I think that might be helpful because some of them interrelate with each
Sure.
other.
Okay, so if we scroll down a little further, the next section was a section that there seemed to be consensus to allow. This section, the original document requires that a dwelling has to be in existence for a period of 5 years and really can't undergo an addition. And one of the fundamental changes that's being proposed was to eliminate that language that disallowed someone from doing an addition to accommodate apartment, which is the most, is the biggest impediment to implementation, is if you can't do an addition. So there seemed to be consensus and support for the idea of allowing additions, but the question remained, and again, there was consensus throughout that discussion that, and supported during the hearing, was perhaps we should also dispense with the requirement that a house has to be at least 5 years old to qualify. So what's highlighted in red there is the original proposal by the Affordable Housing Committee was to maintain that 5-year minimum. There seemed to be some support from the public and consensus amongst the commission to also just scrap that section altogether and eliminate the requirement for a 5-year age minimum for a house. Next section, 6.3.4. Again, this section is originally drafted, eliminates the requirement, again, consistent if we're going to allow an addition to be undertaken, then this section would have to be eliminated. It prohibits alterations. What was proposed is the language presently prohibits a second entry on the front facade, and what the proposal is saying as well, to create a minimum of 10 feet offset. And then there was some disagreement, or lack of consensus, I should say, on the language of whether or not we wanted to maintain the requirement that that second entry be of a different appearance than the primary structure. 6.3.6, again, I don't think there was any issue here. There was some little discussion as to whether what's proposed here is a minimum lease term of 30 days, which is consistent with existing language in our regulations for roomers and boarders that presently requires a minimum lease term of 30 days. So the applicant was simply seeking to sync that up with our existing language that a lease period be at least 30 days to prohibit more transient or weekend rentals or weekly rentals and sync up that 30-day period with our existing language. There were a commissioner or two that thought that 30-day period should be extended to a longer period. That's why that's in green, but it is proposed at 30 days because that matches existing regulatory language. 6.3.10 is a new section. Again, everything in yellow, or the duller yellow, was original language proposed by the applicant. And there was consensus here, and we reworked this first paragraph to say an accessory apartment may qualify as affordable housing, and we added reference to subject to the specific criteria of section 8-30 GK in proposing to eliminate their proposed language to be used for. So I think there was some consensus on how that should read as we had drafted it previously. And if we go on to the next section, I think the only other area of discussion here was we had there seemed to be consensus that a detached accessory structure should be allowed in the AAA zone. We tweaked, so it said, so in red we've added in the, so it says in the residence AAA zone, a freestanding accessory structure may be constructed. And then there was also consensus that we should add the same 40% limit of the area of the main dwelling, or 1,500 feet, whichever is less, consistent with the proposed maximum size requirements in the earlier section. So again, what's in red was my interpretation of where I thought there was agreement amongst the commissioners in the areas that were in green were areas that maybe needed a little bit further discussion. And so if you want, yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, at this point.
Mr. Chair, do you want to see your commissioners, or would you like me to move off of the regulation language? We can't hear you. I'm sorry.
You're on
You're on mute.
Sorry. So yeah, let's go back to the commissioners.
Okay.
So I think, and I see you, Commissioner Braun. I mean, I think it's six issues, 6 different sections that we just need to walk through, and we'll see, you know, how far we get, what we do, and then the prospect is that if we reach consensus or, you know, a good point here, we could act on, you know, a revision to these to this regulation amendment this evening. So, Commissioner Braun, do you have a comment?
Okay, I'll just go through them. Regarding the 30 days in 6.3.6, I didn't realize that we already have that allowance as accessory units or for roomers and boarders.
Yeah.
Is that related to accessory dwelling, or is that some other thing for roomers and boarders, some other thing that we allow?
You go ahead and explain, but it's
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's not related to the accessory apartment regulation.
Okay.
Right now, separately from the accessory apartment regulations, if you want, a roomer and boarder presumes that you're basically renting a room. It's not a separate self-contained dwelling unit where if you've got a spare bedroom, for example, many years ago, we had a secretary in our office who was living alone, and every year she rented a bedroom to a female Fairfield U College student, more to have company than anything else. But they shared the same kitchen, didn't always have meals together, but that person, that roomer or boarder, you know, did not have a separate kitchen. So in those circumstances, the regulations say that you can have up to 2 roomers or boarders for a lease term of no less than 30 days. So that's where the 30 days comes from under our definition and regulation of roomers and boarders.
sort of like a roommate.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's good. I didn't realize that. So my whole problem with the 30 days was it's just turning into a business, maybe prolonged Airbnb or transient people, and it's not actually providing housing for anybody. And that's the whole goal, is to provide diverse housing. But if you believe that the 30 days would actually help provide more diverse housing, then maybe the 30 days is okay. I thought it would just turn it into a business as opposed to providing actual housing for people. The next question I have is for Mark. Will this change the numerator or the denominator, both or neither, in either a moratorium or a 10% calculation related to the affordable housing statute? If we add units within the footprint or even a separate dwelling in the AAA, does that, and if it ends up being an 8-35 qualified one, and an ancillary question is, does this regulation proposal go far enough to satisfy the criteria to become 8-30G? Because obviously it's not an 8-30G application with a housing, with a plan and all that stuff. But aside from that, assuming it does qualify as an 8-30G unit, does that add to the denominator, denominator? Does it make a difference if it's in the footprint of the house or if it's a separate structure?
To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure it makes a difference one way or the other, because in the data that I've reviewed that's submitted to the state Department of Housing, on which our numbers are based, this is housing permits. You know, accessory dwelling units doesn't show up anywhere in those computations. and again, in my earlier response with regard to our conversation on the affordable housing plan, the number that would matter most to us is the number, the denominator that's set by the decennial census, because that is the basis for qualifying for a moratorium. The number of points are based on 2% of the number of dwelling units in town as of the last census.
Is an ADU a dwelling unit that's counted in the census?
You know, when I look at the when I again look at the census information, and again, when you look at that data at our level, a county subdivision, I don't see a separate category for accessory dwelling unit. So I'm not sure how they're factoring in, and I don't think it's even calculated. That's why I don't think it has an effect one way or the other. I don't see it. I don't see it calculated in their numbers.
Right. Now, you know, the incentive for us is to have the ADU deed restricted so that we could get some credit. I think, what is it, a half a point or a quarter point for a deed restricted accessory dwelling unit, correct?
You would get a point based on, you know, how the restriction reads, but I would think if it's age restricted, that's one thing. If it's an 80% AMI unit rental, then it's another thing. But you know, typically you're going to get a point typically, unless it's an age restricted unit.
All right. So if the unit is not restricted in any way, then it doesn't count against us as an additional market rate housing unit, but it doesn't help us in the 830G calculation. Alternatively, if the unit is deed restricted, we don't get hurt by having an additional housing unit in town, but it helps us in the calculation. And so I see a net benefit there.
The one issue that is not completely settled is whether an accessory dwelling unit with a deed restriction with a term of 10 years would be sufficient to count as a housing unit equivalency point, whether you would get moratorium points associated with that. Because there's this little quirky thing in the statute where it particularly singles out accessory dwelling units as only having to have a 10-year deed restriction of 10-year term in order to count towards your affordable housing inventory. But elsewhere, when it talks about how communities might go about qualifying for a temporary moratorium, it makes no such distinction. So the way the Department of Housing has interpreted that is that in order to qualify for moratorium points, in order for the community to count those accessory dwelling units to get housing unit equivalency points towards a moratorium, it would have to have a deed restriction of a 40-year term,
right? Which
is, you know, ludicrous. No one would do that. So there is this disconnect, and why it's not completely simple is that a community has actually made an application to the state for a moratorium, been granted a provisional moratorium because there was a dispute between the Department of Housing and this community as to whether those units counted because they only had a 10-year restriction, and that issue was not fully adjudicated. The temporary moratorium, the term of that, the provisional moratorium that was granted, ran out before the AG's office rendered an opinion. And so it's still an ambiguous, undefined term, if you will.
I got you. Commissioner Levy.
Yeah, a question, separate and apart from numerators, denominators, and all that. From the perspective of the homeowner, I see if it qualifies as affordable housing, they can then have 3 tenants instead of just 2. Is there any other advantage for a homeowner to have an accessory apartment as affordable housing?
At present?
Or even under this? What is the benefit of restricting or somehow qualifying as affordable housing for the homeowner?
I don't know why a homeowner would enter into a deed restriction at present. The reality is that accessory dwelling units, whether there's deed restriction in place or not, tends to provide a level of affordability to either the primary, the homeowner, or the person that's occupying the accessory unit. And it's typically done for a family member. So there is this level of affordability, and you're creating housing options for people that are in need of those opportunities. But it seems to me that, as evidenced by the fact we have 150 plus legal accessory dwelling units per year that register with the Planning and Zoning Office, not one of those is actually deed restricted, because the benefits are the same. So why would you enter into that? Which was the point that I was trying to make earlier, which is separate and apart from whether or not you want to make these changes to make it easier to establish it. But if the community wants to encourage people to enter into deed restriction, we're going to have to, it seems to me, incentivize people to do that in some way.
So my question is, are they related? Is the issue not whether or not they're affordable, but rather just how many people we're going to allow in an accessory unit? Should it be 2, 3, or more? And why would that be linked to how much rent they pay? Particularly if, one could say if you're paying no rent, then you could have 10 people there. Maybe we would just address the issue as to how many people can reside in an accessory unit.
Do you have? I'll defer to my colleague, Mr. Wen, as to whether or not you currently have occupancy restrictions. I believe you do for some units, correct?
We do. The current regulation already increases if it's deed restricted as affordable, allows a 3-person occupancy. In the incentive that exists while in the existing regulations is that you could waive the 5-year period for an addition if the unit you were creating was deed restricted as affordable. But that deed period was only for 5 years, so you would cover that 5-year gap if it were deed restricted. Only 2, and in my memory, I think there were only 2 folks out of the 175 or so that availed themselves of that opportunity. So it wasn't really a strong incentive. But I agree with Mark, and I think what I said the last time we discussed this is that there very well may be a program that the town enters into to try to incentivize the creation of deed restricted units with some sort of monetary incentive, perhaps a tax abatement, for example. But again, that would be a program that would be outside of this regulation. But I think what's important that this regulation does make reference to is the standards of 8-30G subsection K, that if someone is going to have that unit, because there are some specific requirements in 8-30G that differ and are a bit more restrictive than the regulation in chief. So if there is a program that would incentivize affordable units, they'd have to follow the 6.3.10 criteria. And for example, to go back to one of Kathy's initial questions, one of the design criteria, for example, in 8-30G requires the accessory unit to be attached. So a detached unit, whether it's deed restricted or not, would not be able to qualify under 8-30G. It has to be within the existing house. It has to, and for some reason that I do not understand, requires an internal doorway connecting the main living unit to the house. Can't be billed separately for utilities, and a couple of other criteria. For example, they cap, the state under 8-30G caps the square footage of a unit at 30% of the total square footage. So there is a little bit more restrictive criteria for an affordable unit under the statute, and we're simply making reference to that in 6.3.10 in the hope that, potentially there may be an incentive program that the town could provide to try to induce deed restricted units. But to do so, but again, it would be my opinion that that should reside outside of this regulation.
Commissioner Brin?
This is a question, I guess, for John and Mark, or wants to field it. If an accessory dwelling unit was deed restricted, could the homeowner still allow a family member, such as an aging parent or an adult child, to live in the unit?
Yes, as long as that person that's in the unit is income qualified. For example, if it's a parent or a returning college student or somebody, as long as that resident or that occupant earns less than 80% of area median income and is not paying more than 30% of their income for rent, they would qualify.
But you're
Mark,
saying there's other
I see Mark nodding, so if I misspoke, I'm sure he would correct me. But
Correct. That's correct.
But you're saying, in addition to that, there's other restrictions that the state statute places on units that are designated as accessory dwelling units that are designated affordable. They can only be 30% size of the dwelling. They have to have an internal door and so forth.
correct. Yeah, the main difference is they have to be within the main dwelling unit, which our current regulation requires, but now we're considering detached in the AAA zone. Has to have a full kitchen, which our regulation does. 30% total square footage, the internal doorway, and not built separately for utilities. Again, I'm not sure why those certain provisions exist, but they are a bit more restrictive. But they still would be consistent with our local regulation.
I think Jim and I came to the conclusion that because when the regulation changes were made, it was a Milford legislator who pushed through some of the changes. It's very consistent with what Milford's accessory dwelling units require. So I had made the assumption that we had some of those requirements within ours, and Jim said, "Oh no, we don't require that." So I think some of them kind of just they just did a quick copy and paste from what Milford required in order to then have those count as affordable. The only thing that I would say too, in terms of, I think, Mark's comment about whether or not individual homeowners will take on the responsibility of an affordable unit is even for the multifamily developments, whether it's our 10% required, the 15% required, or an 830G with 30% required, those property owners are supposed to be supplying us with an annual list that shows that they're in compliance with the affordability requirements in terms of those residents being income eligible. We get them from some of the property owners, we don't get them from all. And I suspect that it might be overwhelming for individual homeowners to understand that requirement and provide us with that annual reporting that might be needed.
Okay. I think we should go back up to the top.
So would you like me to show the regs again?
A little bit. Sorry?
Would you like me to show the regulations again, or no?
No, does everybody have the?
Yep.
Right. I think I'd prefer to see people.
And I did put them in the chat,
really
so you can just click on that link in order to see them on your own desktops, if you would like.
Yeah, that works. I mean, it's awkward enough to not be in a room together, and
All right. Okay, so can we have one clarification?
Sure.
Now we're talking about accessory apartments in a house, and it is to have a living room, a bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom.
I presume so, but I think.
The definition.
I believe that's what we're talking about.
Hold on. But what one considers to be a living room, a bedroom, a kitchen, and so forth is another story, right? I could very easily see a studio.
Yeah, being living room, bedroom.
I mean, you're talking about a space of 450 square feet. You're not going to put up walls in a space that's 450 square feet. You're going to have a kitchenette. You're going to have a day bed. You're going to have a dining table and a window. I mean,
yeah, we don't get into that level of specificity. You know, a dwelling unit under the zoning regulations is defined as a freestanding unit with facilities for both cooking and sleeping. In order to establish a new unit, there is a requirement of sign off by the health department, which in the health code, there are minimum requirements for sleeping rooms and window sizes and so forth. So it has to meet the health and building codes outside of the zoning regulations. So what we're defining is a, you know, it's a self-contained living unit subordinate to the existing residence. However, that may be defined in the building and health codes in terms of room layout, and so forth. But yes, it presumes there's separate cooking facilities and separate sleeping facilities.
Okay. Well, we only have 3 green areas, right? We have to agree on, yeah.
no, that's not true.
The
There are
square
6.
footage and the entrance and the 30 days. Isn't that all we have in green that we have to discuss?
That is my interpretation. The areas in red, and unless tonight you disagree with my takeaway from the last meeting, is that the areas in red, I thought there was consensus on. The area in green needed more discussion, and then obviously we've had some dialogue on the affordability question.
Right, and my point is that when we talk about consensus, that might not have been unanimous. I, for one, do not know that I agree with the change in 6.3.3, eliminating the 5-year limitation.
Okay.
And I think it serves our purpose to at least discuss, even if it is perfunctory, each one of these.
Sorry, even if it is what?
Perfunctory. It's simply to understand that we're all on the same page or not.
Right.
Okay. As to each one of these amendments. I mean, this is pretty significant.
Oh, yes.
You know, so
no, I just wanted that clarified, what the definition of the space was. And that we basically had 3 green items, but you're right, some people may bring up red items. Okay, very good. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So in some ways, you know, this is like herding cats. My apologies. But, you know, somebody's got to do it. So the first one is 6.3.2. I mean, honestly, the first one appears in 6.1, you know, without increasing the number of residential buildings. Presumably that language was stricken because of a change down below that would have allowed for these accessory apartments to be built in a freestanding unit, unit on the property, right?
Correct.
In AAA zone?
Yeah.
Only, okay. Right, I assume that's why they struck it, yeah.
So it's not necessarily the case.
Well, again, if there's not support for the idea of a detached structure, then that language would not need to be removed.
Exactly.
But yes, the intent of removing that language is paired with the intent to permit a detached unit, which may result in an increase in the number of residential buildings.
Exactly. Yeah.
But just, sorry, Mr. Chairman, just in the interest of moving forward, is there an objection to having, at least as an experiment in our zoning regulations, detached accessory dwelling units in the AAA zone alone? I know there was some talk about expanding it to the AA and single A, but I think that that would require us to renotice it. And I, for one, am not in favor of expanding it beyond the AAA at this time. But perhaps there is a consensus that detached structures can be permissible in the AAA zone.
Yeah, so I'm on the fence on that. Commissioner Braun?
We might consider, however, expanding it beyond AAA if the parcel of land is 2 acres or more. There are parcels of land that people have which are in any other zone, but they happen to be big pieces of land. Is there a problem with allowing them to have a self-standing structure?
So if we increase the geography beyond the AAA zone, we need to renotice it. We can only narrow this proposed amendment. We cannot enlarge it. Okay? So that's off the table. I'm even on the fence on allowing secondary structures in the AAA zone. All right. So
How many or what? I'm sorry. What was your question?
whether the question was whether commissioners would favor expanding the the allowance of a freestanding structure beyond the AAA zone into other zones where there was a lot size of 2 or more acres.
No, not particularly.
Okay.
Not right now. I wouldn't.
All right. So, I mean, by show of hands, I mean, who is in favor of 6.3.11 as written, as amended, rather?
11.
This allows accessory dwelling units to be built as freestanding units in the AAA zone, 40% of the area of the main dwelling, or 1,500 square feet, whichever is less.
Yes.
So that's everybody, including Commissioner Braun. Yeah. So, all right.
Okay.
So there's that, which means that the change in 6.1 is should also remain. 6.3 conditions and requirements. This is to eliminate a minimum of 450 square feet and raise the maximum to 40% or 1,500 square feet, whichever is less. Do we have consensus on that? We do. We're gonna put people in 300 square feet of space. You're on mute, Commissioner Francis.
I favor the 450, retaining the 450.
The minimum of 450 square feet.
Yeah. Although I'm fine with the other half.
Yeah. Go ahead, Commissioner Levy.
I've lived in 500 square feet with 3 people and we got along fine. I don't think.
Yeah, and you can do that under these regulations. And you can do that under these regulations. That's it's more than 450 square feet.
Yeah,
and we allow up to 3 people.
I think, with these small houses, I don't think we need a minimum. I think rule of reason will prevail.
Fair. I'm more persuaded by the rule of reason that I am that somebody would actually live in 250 square feet of living space. That counsels me in favor of the amendment. Mark, am I expressing my age now? Am I showing my age?
All right. Are we saying retain the 450?
No. The consensus is to eliminate it.
Oh. Okay. No, I'm not in favor of that. I like to keep it.
Yeah.
I don't trust reason.
So and yeah.
I want rules.
That's good. Yeah, so then it's going to come down to, voting on the whole thing, right? Yeah, Commissioner Levy.
I mean, if somebody wants to have a 20 by 20 for a single individual with a microwave and a coffee pot, why not? It's 400
Yeah,
square feet.
I get it. Commissioner Braun?
To pass health code requirements, they would have to have a bathroom, kitchen facilities, and a bed. That's it, right? For health code? So it probably couldn't go much under 450 anyway. I don't know, maybe it could.
I know, you're with me. That's fine. Anybody else? All right. So it appears there is consensus for eliminating the 450 square feet to adopting the amendments that have been written. 6.33, eliminating the 5-year requirement that the building that the primary dwelling having been built for 5 years. I show of hands. Who's in favor of this? 1, 2, 3. Commissioner.
Matt, you had mentioned you might have a problem. Could you explain your issues with it so I am cognizant of them?
Yeah, so we passed this, and then I don't see a new construction being built without there being an apartment included in the home, or in AAA adjacent to the home, a second building. Why wouldn't you build the opportunity for another stream of income, or for a family member, or for whatever reason? And it just strikes me as, frankly, a little odd. So I don't know, and maybe I'm just all wet on this. But I don't think that we want, all new construction to be built with an apartment, a built-in apartment. But I may be in the minority. Commissioner Levy.
Well, I don't know that they all would be, because it increases the expense. And unless somebody wants an accessory apartment, it limits the potential buyers. Equally, if somebody wants to build a new home and build it with an accessory for mom and dad, why should we block that? And probably they're doing it anyway, calling it pool houses. So.
Yeah, no, that's yeah.
You have an interesting point about the income stream, though.
Commissioner. There's nothing in these regulations that prohibits anyone from creating an accessory dwelling unit and renting it out as an apartment. Market rate. We should all know that. We're not necessarily creating affordable housing here. I agree that is the likely outcome of most, but Commissioner Braman.
I would agree with Commissioner Levy, and I would say anecdotally there are a lot of stories of families that are looking to move an aging parent in with them and have trouble finding suitable location in which to build new home, new construction that has that. I think that the size limitations that we're imposing and other limitations that we have in the regulation will prevent this from being the de facto that all new homes are constructed.
Yeah. So let me challenge everybody and say, why not require all of these accessory dwelling units to be deed restricted affordable, or at least, if not deed restricted, they must be rented affordable. We could install in the regulations, instead of there being deed restricted, we could require each of them to be rented according to the affordable housing, affordable rental rates. This would disincent the creation of market rate apartments, and might also achieve the goals that we're talking about, right? Mr. Wen.
I have my response to that would be that you certainly could, but I think it would be a disincentive to participation, and we might likely see folks, that are creating units, underground, if you will, or without the benefit of a permit, rather than participating, in the permit program. So I think we'd get fewer. You're right. I think the end result is we'd get fewer takers, but I don't know that we'd have fewer folks out there establishing units. They would just be doing it unauthorized, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're doing it now, though, if that's the case.
Well, I think to some degree they probably are, and one of the goals here is to reduce some of those barriers. The biggest barrier is the latter part of this paragraph, is the ability not to have an addition. So I don't know. I don't have the sense that if this were, regardless of where you fall on the 5-year period, I don't get the sense that it's going to lead to a tremendous influx in the number of units being created. The goal here is just to reduce some of the barriers for those that might want to participate. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. Mr. Barnhart, you had your hand up.
Oh, I don't want to speak over top of the commission, but I would say I would agree with what Mr. Wendt just said, but the typical scenario is you're providing this accessory unit for a family member most often. Not everyone is going to be cut out to be a landlord. This is different than somebody owning a rental housing unit as investment income, because you have to live with that person. You have to live in the same space, not in the same dwelling unit with this individual under this scenario. So I'm not sure that, again, I would agree with Mr. Wendt. I'm not sure that there would be that many folks that would avail themselves of this opportunity. But, as the scenario is laid out, if you have an elderly loved one and you're building a new house, why wouldn't you want to be able to facilitate some way?
And so under those circumstances, what difference would it make if we required any rental of that accessory dwelling unit to be at affordable rates? Because if it's for that elderly family member, they're not going to pay rent anyway. If it's for that teenage, that the college student that's coming back home to live, they're not going to pay rent anyway. So I don't understand what the pushback is.
So are you simply suggesting, as it relates to any new construction?
No, I'm referring to all.
Okay.
But what's the other side of the coin to that?
The other side is.
Well,
sorry.
I think, as Mr. Wendt indicated, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to not register these, but anyway.
They're not going to build them because they can't rent them at market rates?
They don't want to be bothered with the deed restriction that's required.
No, I'm not talking about a deed restriction anymore. I'm not talking about a deed restriction anymore. I'm just simply requiring that the dwelling unit, if it is to be rented, shall be rented at affordable rates. And we can adopt the metrics under 830G.
In the absence of a deed restriction, what's the benefit to the town of doing that?
Well, the benefit of the town is when we do get the next phase of this incentive plan together, those folks will already meet the requirements and can simply file the deed restriction, right? The incentive to the town is that we don't have market rate rental apartments cropping up all over the place. I mean, the whole purpose of this is to create affordable housing units, is it not? The whole purpose of this is to create more, housing for elderly family members, or the college kid that comes home to live with mom and dad.
I think the intent is broader than that. I think the intent is to provide a range of housing options for folks in town, and obviously a percentage of these are going to be naturally affordable anyway, because it's to a family member and you're probably not going to be charging them.
That's my point.
Much. So
yeah,
I think it's broader than that. I don't necessarily believe that it's totally restricted solely to that purpose. So,
well, the other piece of that is that those that are rented are going to be, in the lesser. They may not qualify necessarily as affordable under the statute, but they're less expensive than other units. So it's another opportunity for less expensive housing that might not, meet the strict definition of affordable.
Sure. Yeah. No, I can understand that.
Which. Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. I saw Commissioner Levy's been sort of raising his hand.
Yes, I just think we're overcomplicating it, trying to link it rental rates and so forth. I mean, the size of the units is going to limit the amount of rent. And we don't want to make it too complicated. Let's say mom and dad die after 5 years. Do you have to move or leave the place fallow, or can you rent it to a guy who's working at Sikorsky for $1,500 a month? What do we, it's sitting there already. Why impose all these restrictions?
Yeah. Commissioner Francis. You're on.
You're muted, Meg.
But that's the other side of the coin. Is it's one thing for elderly friends or elderly parents or a young person starting out working who's your family member or son or daughter of your good friend or something very close. But once those people go, do you want these apartments all over the place with no restriction at now less than 450 square feet? I'm not sure that flies in neighborhoods all over town. And we haven't found any way for it to do the town any good, affordable housing wise, which is fine if it's, your elderly parent or your elderly good friend or a young person just starting out who's got some connection to you. But after that, you've got this space, and I'm sure there's a very strong incentive to rent it out, take the money, and how does that affect the neighbors?
Well, the only thing I would say to that is that these regulations that as they exist presently have been around for over 40 years. And we have 173 documented units. So there hasn't been a mass proliferation of units. But by the same token, those that are, and if we're making it a little more easier to gain entry, maybe there will be some additional units. But the fact is, there's market for rental housing that for which we lack a supply. So a diverse range of housing is beneficial to the community. Beside meeting an affordable housing standard, housing of all types is beneficial for folks that might not otherwise be able to have a unit if they want to rent a unit and not be an owner. To have that opportunity and be in the town. But again, I don't. 173 units over the life of this regulation so far. We're trying to reduce, make it a little bit easier. But again, I don't see that's going to be we're opening the floodgate to a huge increase in the total number of units. We'll find out.
Though the reason we have 173 is because there are all of these, sort of gatekeeping
Sure.
in the regulations, that it has to be not less than 450 square feet, that it needs a secondary entrance, that on the existing foundation, no separate access from the outside shall be in the front facade. That there are limitations on how and where these can be constructed, which have limited the proliferation. Now, I do not believe that, I believe that with all of these limitations removed, that there would be no reason why new construction of whatever 1,500, 200 square, 1,500, 2,000 square foot home, in the center of town won't have a second door 10 feet away from the front door that will have a 300 square foot apartment next door. It's now a two-family home, and there's rental income because we're now calling it an accessory dwelling unit.
Oh, I agree. I'm sorry. I was more responding to the concept of the dialogue of should all the units be rented at be required to be at an affordable rate rather than the 5 year. But yeah, the reason you've hit on exactly why that existing provision exists. That there was some concern initially when this regulation was initially adopted that folks would roll out new construction in be potentially a de facto multifamily house, and that's why that provision exists. The largest impediment to entry is not necessarily the 5 year age limitation. It's the fact that you can't build an addition on a house that might be more than 5 years old. So the committee themselves, proposed to maintain the language, that first sentence in section 3.3.3. There just was some discussion during the hearing that there should be consideration given to its removal. In their words, so I'm sorry if I couched that in that my response earlier. I was more speaking to the affordability issue rather than the 5 year limitation issue.
So I see the strike through in the red. I do not. It's my understanding that the regulation as proposed is to eliminate the minimum of 5 years. Correct?
No, I struck through that in red and highlighted it, and because that was text that from our last discussion, I thought there was some support to eliminate. But the application itself from the Affordable Housing Committee proposes to keep that first sentence and maintain the 5 year minimum age requirement, but delete the prohibition for an addition.
So why is that? Why does that have strike through it in this version?
Because it is text that was proposed to be deleted from our last discussion. Perhaps the strike through is confusing the matter. I would agree with you, but it's the intent there was that the original draft of the application keeps that language intact, and the highlighting to consider eliminating that sentence ensued from the public hearing and further discussion from our last meeting.
All right. And so how would it read? Maybe I need to get to the hold on. Yeah. So what we're saying is I need to open staff notes. No.
Yeah, from the staff notes, I'll read that section that the current regulation requires an eligible house to be at least 5 years old and not to have undergone an addition. The current proposal maintains the minimum 5-year age criteria, but eliminates the restriction for additions. That's the proposal as it was made by the applicant. It's highlighted because there was some discussion at our January 12th meeting that there might be some support for eliminating that first sentence as well.
All right. So if I have confused it more, I apologize. But to the extent that we're considering eliminating that, I'm opposed. I like it as proposed by the Affordable Housing Committee. Commissioner Brayman.
May I make a suggestion for a compromise that might be sort of an incremental change? In 6.3.6, we, Commissioner Levy already noted that if you designate a unit as affordable housing, you can have occupancy of 3% as opposed to 2. You could similarly have a section 6.3.3 that states the originally existing residence shall have been in existence for a minimum of 5 years, comma, unless the unit is designated as an affordable housing unit. So in other words, in order to do new construction of an ADU, you would have to designate it as affordable. Otherwise, your dwelling would have to be in existence for 5 years.
I kind of like that. I don't know. It's that is an interesting twist to this discussion.
I thought that's along with
what happens
with grandma and grandpa or mom and dad are rich or still working, they wouldn't qualify.
This is just for new construction. Yeah, and grandma and grandpa, if they're rich, they still qualify for affordable housing because the quantum of the formula does not take into account assets. It only takes into account what you earn today. And if grandma and grandpa are rich, they have an LLC and a trust to put that income in.
But if they're still working and want to assist in the helping out with their grandchildren, a certain old lawyers would love to do. So
not to talk over anybody, but the Affordable Housing Committee proposed leaving the 5 years in. We could go a little further than that by saying, well, take the 5 years out for affordable units.
For new construction. All right, I'll consider that. I don't think we're voting on this tonight. I'm still uncomfortable with this. I should say I would prefer not to. Because I think this is an interesting suggestion that I would like to think about and I'd like to see. And that moves the needle for me, Commissioner Brayman, in incenting the creation of ADUs that are deemed affordable. And I totally support that. And if we can get that in there, that's a great way to do it. Okay.
Because then we're back to how long it only has to be affordable for 10 years.
Well, yeah, but
Which is
that's
kind of
the 830K standard is the 10 years, but
then we don't know if it counts for our numerator.
Yeah,
keep in mind that numerator only resets every 10 years, so it's not a odometer. It's set with every decennial.
The denominator.
Correct.
Yeah. And that's fair, but
we're trying to up the numerator.
Well, we are, but you know what? I'm even less moved by whether it counts under 830G than I am by the creation of affordable units that are going to be used in that fashion, and also disincenting people from just simply creating more market rate, apartments in what otherwise are single family zones.
So then you could say that instead in 6.3.3, you could say that it has to be in existence for 5 years, unless the ADU satisfies our BMR regulation for below market. Doesn't have to be deed restricted.
Right. Right. That's a good, yeah. And you know, to the extent then down below, you also have this, if it's it qualifies under 830G, then there still is no incentive for that to occur. Okay, I think we got to move on. 830. 6.3.4. Access to the apartment may be on the front and separated by at least 10 feet. Show of hands. How do people feel about that? Yes or no? Raise your hand if you like it. Yeah. Good. Everyone. Mr. Francis, no? Can't hear you on mute.
Pushing me on mute on my picture instead of on the computer. I like Ridgefields where the second entrance must reflect single family character. I feel pretty strongly about maintaining the single family look of a home. And having another door 10 feet away may or may not do that. I really don't see much reason why it can't be on the side or the back and the single family character maintained. I think that's pretty important to the neighbors.
Okay, Commissioner Braun.
Or there could be instances where you just, the logistics or the topography won't allow it to be on the side. However, it should have a different appearance. I think that should be restored. The second door should have a different appearance so you know it's not a duplex house.
Okay, other comments on this?
Maybe we could phrase it that it must be on the side or the back, but if not possible, it must have a different appearance. I could live with that. I just don't want things to look two family in a one family neighborhood. I don't feel that's fair to residents.
So I don't know where how the not possible gets interpreted. I don't know how that's enforced. I don't know what the meaning of that is.
I think it's already worded that way. It starts out by saying you can have a separate entrance on the front if it's 10 feet away and different.
Yeah, provided. No, that's right. So it should be on the side. So it could be a combination of what exists today, which is that the access should be on the side or back, but can be on the front if it's 10 feet away and different.
Yeah, I think
I could live with that.
Says that.
Say again?
I think it says that.
No, it doesn't.
In what's proposed by the Affordable Housing Committee, we were thinking to go a step further and remove the potentially ambiguous requirements of the different appearance. But it sounds like there's at least 3 votes to keep the different appearance.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should keep the different appearance.
Commissioner Levy.
There's different appearance. One's painted white and one's painted gray.
Yeah, it's pretty ambiguous.
So why is it in there?
And subjective.
It would make a difference if it were happening in your neighborhood.
I understand the intent, but again, the language is kind of squishy in terms of, you know, how different is different. You know, that it doesn't have a front porch roof over it and the other one does. You know, I get it. I understand what they're in the intent, and that's really kind of what the discussion was at the hearing, that the whole intent is to try to, the unit subordinate to the main house. It's just how do you define what different is?
Subordinate is a good word.
What's that?
Subordinate is a good word. provided that it is separated from the front door of the existing residence by at least 10 feet and subordinate thereto.
Well, also, Mr. Chairman, we could probably make it stronger by saying the entrance should not be on the front, but if need be. And, you know, it must.
We can, let me make a suggestion here. I understand there seems to be some, that at least the language that was proposed for discussion to be potentially eliminated. Sounds like there's support to leave that in, but let us play with that a little bit and see if we can't get you a little more comfortable with that.
All right.
There was some discussion. I'll go back to the hearing. There was some discussion and some good visual examples that were provided to us on how doors on the same facade could be different, and maybe we can try to get some quantifiable language that makes that more workable.
Yeah.
Or Mr. Went, occasionally the zoning code has visual examples.
Right.
Which code does?
Our own zoning regulations and those of other towns sometimes provide in text a picture of an example of different entrances or an example of something that would satisfy the regulations. So at least there's some guidance.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll take another pass at that. Again, during the presentation, there were some good examples, and we'll queue that back up and see if we can't take another pass at that for you. I understand what everybody's saying, and I think we're there, and see if we can't be a little more definitive and less subjective.
All right, sounds good. 6.3.6. How do we all feel about the 30 days? 30 days sufficient or not? Commissioner Braun?
I'd like to say 60 days. I think anyone taking a semester would be here for.
Commissioner Brayman? No, you're on mute.
I was going to say I'm comfortable with the 30 days because it's key to the rumors and borders, but I don't have a strong objection to 60 days either.
Yeah, same. Anyone else?
I'll support 60 days.
Commissioner Levy? Yeah, okay. Commissioner Elliott, anything? Good. Okay. So am I. I think that's fine. That's good.
Okay.
6310. Talked about this earlier. So then it begs the question as to whether we tie 6.3.3 to this as well and say that if that unit is to be, but I don't know that we need to.
Can I ask Mark, what is the median, what would be the rent for 80% of the median income that would be applied if it was affordable? Is it the state or the county?
Mark?
It's the lesser of the statewide or the area, the Bridgeport PMSA. So right now, I think the lesser, they're very close, but the lesser is the Bridgeport area. So are you asking what a rent would be? Let's see, I calculated rents here recently. So studio last year would have been about $1,000, $994, and one bedroom would be at about 12.
Okay.
Doesn't it matter if it's one person or two people or four people?
No.
It's calculated based on the number of bedrooms typically, so The income calculation is based on the number of people in the household.
Okay. So, does anyone else have any other comments on this section? 6.3.10? No. Okay.
I think I'm already on record that I don't see the need to tie it to the affordable housing.
Yes. Very clear.
Thank you.
And a bit convincing 2 hours later. 6.3.11, I think we also talked about, and I think we're all comfortable with the proposed changes here. Good. All right. And I think that's it.
I just have one other question.
Yes.
If we eliminate the affordable aspect, then at some point we should consider, do we want to limit residents to 2 people, 3 people, or not have that in there?
Well, I think that your point is taken with respect to tying it back to a requirement, but the way that this is now modified is simply that it may qualify as an affordable unit in accordance with, Section 830GK if these following things are done. I view this more as like a notice section. If folks reading these regulations can see what they need to do in order to gain the benefit of 830G, but it's not a requirement. And if I'm reading that incorrectly, or if I'm looking at that incorrectly, please someone disabuse me.
I would agree with what you said, but if we are considering adding a requirement under 6.3.3 on the 5-year rule, that the 5-year rule remains unless the new construction creates an affordable unit, there would be an additional, tie-in to affordability there. The question is, and again, it didn't sound like that you necessarily needed or desired that unit be deed restricted under new construction, but just be restricted in the rent qualification for affordability. But again, affordable, would be eligible for that additional occupant.
Yep.
I guess just my question is, de facto, we'll be limiting it to 2 people. Is that what we want to do? I don't really have a position on that, but I think we should be clear that for all intents and purposes, under these regulations, you would not have more than 2 people in an accessory unit. Or we want to allow 3. Let's say with a disabled child who's staying with the parents. So I don't know.
Well, it's not. The only thing I'll say is it's not a change to the existing language. But the question you're raising is, should there be a change to the existing language?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Commissioner Braun.
I like keeping it the way it is because it gives just that much more incentive to have it deed restricted. If you want it for 3 people, do the deed restriction for 10 years. I do have a question for Mark since we have him here very rarely. So just to clarify and reaffirm, by doing the separate units up in AAA zone, that will, once the 10-year census is done, add to our denominator in terms of it will act as another dwelling unit in the denominator, or won't it? And that's the 10-year census that defines how many total dwelling units we have in town, when we have like 20,000 or so now.
The way I would see it is yes, because it would in order to construct it, there would be a building permit to construct a dwelling unit in that accessory structure, and there would be a record of it to the state, so it would be in our inventory, if you will, as recorded every 10 years.
And it would not,
I would
unless it was
say that-
restricted. Oh, sorry.
Oh, since we just did the census, we get a 10-year, once it updates in March, I think we're supposed to get our first numbers, and we get 10 years of accessory apartments. We don't see that for another 10 years.
And again, that's in relation to, again, the more realistic milestone for us, which is the temporary moratorium. You know, the state does each year calculate, you know, we have to file with the state number of units that are of deed restricted affordable, and they compute where we are in relation to the total number of dwelling units as a percentage, and we're roughly 20%. So, you know, add one unit here or there, it doesn't obviously change the number in a community with 22,000 dwelling units in town. But I want to be clear that, you know, each year the state does that calculation. It's not going to materially affect how it relates to that 10% threshold.
Yeah.
So.
Very good. Okay, so I think the next step here is for Mr. Wendt to work a little magic with the language and circulate another revision. I think would be helpful for me is to mark that against the proposal as received by the Affordable Housing Committee, so that we can see those changes, if you would. Does anybody else have any other requests or comments, questions? Commissioner Levy.
Perhaps it could be framed in a fashion where the questions or items we would be voting on could be specifically identified and interrelated, so that we can sort of just focus on the yay or nay of each issue.
Yeah, so that's the problem with this. It's one vote. This is an up or down on the proposed regulation amendment. That's the way I'm seeing it, and I don't know. I mean, I guess somebody could move independently to adopt the changes in one section and then move on and move to adopt the changes in the next section and so forth. But I guess I kind of viewed this as a holistic effort of us trying to come to consensus on the regulations as proposed and tweaks, you know, to the different incentives and such to harmonize, you know, the 450 with the 1,500 square feet, you know what I mean, here and there. You know, like the strike through in the first paragraph is dependent upon the revision in 10 paragraphs later and so forth. So I suppose we can sort of take that. We'll see how the commission chooses to move the item, but I had anticipated that it would be an up or down on the whole thing, or perhaps with motions to tweak, you know. Commissioner Brayman?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to vote on it holistically, but just as a practical matter, it sounds to me like we're down to the 5 years and the appearance of the separate entrance.
I would agree. You know, I want to look at the language that you proposed with respect to the couple of items, you know, but I think this has been productive, and I thank everybody for taking another several hours out of your week and dedicating it to, you know, the commission and the affordable housing goals and objectives of the town. It's really important. I thank you know, Mark for being here another night. It's very helpful, and all of the members of the Affordable Housing Committee that I see are here, and interested, citizens, and for all of the work that's gone into all of this over a long period of time. We're moving it forward, and hopefully we all can appreciate the end is near. All right. So with that, I will bid everyone a good night, and I'll adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.